Hey everyone, and welcome back to Europe in Detail. In today's episode, we are going to build a really crazy cable car that runs down the side of a cliff basically to a cute little fishing village with some restaurants and various other things. And this cable car is going to drop down about 450 in-game meters, so it is very steep, but it's also based off one from real life in Santorini, so let's get going. So let's start here with the terraforming of the terrain, and when we look at this in real life, we can see here that they've got these very distinctive looking cliffs that we've got pretty much through the rest of the area, but looking at these ones here, they look very heavily eroded. We've got these massive red cliffs directly behind the buildings, but we've also got these massive gorges between them. And I guess that's probably the most prominent feature that I'm going to introduce into the game here. I've used the Terraform tool to create the basic peninsula shape and also a bit of a rough outline of where I want the cliff, and then I'm going to come back with the brush on a slightly smaller setting and make these little bits that jut out. These are going to be the cliff sections, and I'm hoping that the gorges just naturally form between these. My normal go-to for this type of cliff is just to use one of Grey Flame's rocks and sort of place them in where it's a bit steeper, or to make it look steeper in places, but this time I've decided to go with Avania's terrain conforming rocks. These look pretty good and they sort of matched that real life model closer than how I would normally do it, so I've got to go with this method with that in mind. I think I do still use the Grey Flame rocks, but you only see a very small amount of them where I want it to go very steep. And I'm also stopping Avania's rock props short of those gorges, so it sort of creates them between where I've got these props. I've also chosen the most ready colour that was available. I don't have the option to turn these to PO and change the colour, or even change the colour with Prop Painter, but they come as a default in this sort of ready colour, which is pretty perfect. And I'm really stoked with how this comes out. The two different types of rocks really complement each other, and this should make for a really good backdrop to what we are going to build next. The name of the bay that I'm taking inspiration from in real life is called Moody Bay, and looking at it here in real life, you can see there's a road that comes down here to a little wee car park, and I want to follow this pretty much as closely as I can. And that really goes for the building once we get into Moody Bay as well. It's got this really cool sort of vibe to it that we're going to get into a bit later on, but for now let's wind this road down here so that we've got access. And it's fair to say that this is the point where it differs from real life. My map here is much steeper than what it is in real life in this location, so I have to wind a road down here, and it really means we've just got a few more twists and turns on the way. I'm using just a blank low traffic road, and I'm using node controller to make it smooth and make it as realistic as I can with these hairpins and whatnot. I do also plan on coming back and detailing this road properly, but it's sure as hell not in this episode because we build so much in Moody Bay once we get down there. I just didn't have the time to come back and deal to this road like maybe I should. So for now, this twisty road sits undetailed. But once we get to the bottom here, we can start installing our car parks. And I want these car parks to be realistic working car parks. And that is because in real life, Moody Bay is all pedestrian only. And that's exactly what we're going to do here. So people are going to need somewhere to park their car if they're not bringing the cable car down. So once we're finished here, we've got a couple of small and relatively simple car parks. I've also finished and detailed a bit of a cliff behind it as well. One cool thing that they've got down in this bay in real life is you can go on a boat tour out to the Greek Isles from here. So you bet your bottom dollar I am including a ferry service from here that's eventually going to go out to one of the islands. So I spend a bit of time here plumbing in just the vanilla ferry stop, and admittedly at this point I thought that I would upgrade this at some point with like a blank one or something of the like, but I actually couldn't find one, which surprised me a little bit, so I end up detailing this later on and pretty much making it look unrecognizable. And because obviously that's going to be highly functional, I needed to get that in before I start detailing the bay here and getting the terrain right. In regards to that terrain, I'm using the slope function here to make it look like it's an even sort of a 30-degree slope from the base of the cliff down to the water's edge. This is closely mimicking what we sort of see in real life. And that 30-degree slope that we've just created is pretty much the area we're going to build this little bay on. And much like the rest of Greece, I've really struggled as to where to begin building this. There's just so much going on, and I guess the fact that I want this to be functional as well, I need to think about that. You know, where do I start? Well, I decided to start with the water's edge. We see some very old stone seawalls down here, and it's mostly a high traffic pedestrian area along here as well that runs through a whole lot of different restaurants. So these stone retaining walls make up a huge part of the aesthetic of the overall bay. And it's not just the same wall along here as well, it changes 3 or 4 different times. Whether it's been repaired over time or it was just made originally with different materials, I'm going to stick true to that. And once I've got those in, I'll go through and add some surfaces in as well. I guess with all of that in mind, the reason I've started with the water's edge is because we can't really place any restaurants or any buildings whatsoever in until that definite edge along the water's been created. So now you'll see me run a quick road up and around the bay here that we're going to pretty much hide and detail in places. And that road is part of a brand new Greece related pack coming out from Sully, and I was lucky enough to get an early access to it. There's also a whole lot of like plastered networks and network buildings and various props and stuff that he's made that's just fantastic. And Sully has also got the save game. He's the first person to get the Greece save game, and he's been in there flying around taking some screenshots for all the cool stuff that he's made for the workshop. So make sure you give him some love in the comments, guys. We are going to see a lot more of his assets and work coming up in the series. The buildings down in Amudi Bay in real life are pretty varied. In fact, it looks like there's some buildings that are built into like old ancient ruins in places. Some of the buildings down here look like their sole purpose is sort of related to the fishing industry. And we've also got some nice restaurants along the water's edge that are pretty iconic, and these are all mixed in with those general white plastered buildings that we've had around the rest of the place as well. So let's go back to the ferry stop now and start trying to detail it up a bit. You heard me mention earlier about some of these buildings being in ancient ruins or old ruins, and that's what I'm going to try and do here. And obviously we've got our road here as well that services our ferry dock, and I need that to run past this ferry area as well and up a little bit further into the bay so that I can connect the cable car to it as well. I kind of want to make it look like the road goes through an old arch here and underneath some of those ruins. From there, the road's only going to go about 100 meters to service the cable car, and it's going to be underneath all of the buildings. So essentially all the service vehicles using this road are going to be hidden. Hopefully it just looks like they're entering that arch and exiting it. And here you can see me just using procedural objects on some old broken stone walls, trying to make a basic shell or an old ancient structure here. I make it a little bit darker as well later on with procedural objects. But putting these ruins in first basically means that I can integrate them into this bay really well when I put the rest of the buildings in. At this point I've put a handful more buildings in, some of them with procedural objects and some of them are real Greek style residential buildings, and the road is 90% covered. We've got our road directly underneath these buildings that are servicing anything that needs it, and now I want to start running some pedestrian paths around the place so that we can get our pedestrians moving around through these buildings in view. I also want to really integrate this part of our bay with these cliffs, so you're seeing me do that here now. I'm using exactly the same method that I used at the beginning of the episode when we made the cliffs, just to bring them in a little bit closer to the buildings that we've made here. Now I can move on to putting in this cable car, and what a mission this was. I had to find obviously a nice spot where we could get up the cliff without smashing all the passengers into the rocks. And you might also be wondering what on earth these weird buildings are I'm placing down here. These are actually blank cable car stations. They were the only ones I could find, and yeah, they don't look pretty at this point. You can see the two coloured stripes on them. The blue one represents the direction the cable car is going to travel in, and the purple one is where the passengers will exit and enter the station. So I'll put one at the top and the bottom, because I'm pretty sure that's how it works, and then connect a line between the two of them. I also used the mod Advanced Vehicle Options to change out the cable car to Blue Thunder's ride version. So the passengers are using it, everything's working okay. I want to come back and detail this up a little bit now and hide that horrible looking building. So how am I going to do that? Well, I'm using procedural objects with one main clay looking building and sort of creating a main structure out of that. I'm also being sure to make sure I leave a gap where the cable cars enter and exit, and also I'm leaving the pedestrian paths obviously in clear view so we can see the citizens going in and out of the station. Then I can add in some small props like fences, stairs and shade covers. Moving up to the top station, it's going to be pretty no frills, at least at this point of the build. We're basically just going to make it look like there's a cluster of Greek style builds here, or buildings, and there's basically just a gap in them or a hole in them where the cars can run into. As primal as that may sound, that's actually exactly what we see in real life. This is being modelled off a similar one in the real Santorini in another town called Thera. So for now, I'm just going to leave the top station like this, and we'll come back and detail this in a later episode. It should look pretty cool later on when we do detail all of this up, when it's all buildings up here and you can just see these little cable cars going up and down the cliff and into this little wee gap in the buildings. I'm also really looking forward to seeing the citizens in game use this to get down to our bay when it's all finished. It should be really cool. Back down the bottom of the bay here, I want to start installing a boat ramp down here, and it's going to be part of hiding this vanilla jetty that is kind of just sticking out from the ferry stop. I'd like to make one side of it a boat ramp and the other side of it a kind of a restaurant right on the edge of the wharf. So starting with that boat ramp, I'm using that plain road and node controller and just trying to ramp the terrain down here so it gently falls into the ocean. And without going any further than that, at this point I want to go over to the other side of the wharf and start installing the surface that we're going to build the restaurant on. I'm also going to put some of Sully's nice white plastered network fences around the edge of it. And to hide the ferry stop completely, I'm just going to use pretty much the same method I used on the cable car station. So procedural objects, one type of building, and then make a main structure out of it that covers the ferry stop. I'm also going to plumb in a couple of other more traditional Greek style buildings that are going to become the restaurant. And with that, we have our first restaurant in the bay complete. and once I cleaned up the mess after that tidal wave rolled through, we're going to carry on with this next bit here. And I thought this retaining wall here across the road from the boat ramp, I think it just looked way too big. So I'm going to take out a section of it here and sort of reduce it and introduce a few buildings here so we can level off here a bit more appropriately than just a sheer retaining wall. There's one Greek style building here that's perfect for building down these slopes. It's sort of a naturally terraced style building, so I've put that in over on the right hand side of the screen here, and then just a couple of generic, I think they're actually from a Malta pack, the ones I put down next to the road. You're also going to see that I've introduced the first coloured building of the bay, and this is going to be first of many. We see quite a few coloured buildings down here. And with that, that's pretty much all the buildings I'm going to put in here. So I want to put a pedestrian path in here as well, because these buildings are going to be functioning buildings. And then just sort of detail with that generic Greek style, like white plastered walls and the like, just to tie it in with the rest of the area. Now I want to try and make everything look really old, and I'm going to start here with one of Sully's new decals. This kind of looks like we're getting like an exposed cobble underneath the road. So maybe there was an old road here and they've paved over it. And then maybe there's a couple of old concrete broken or, really rough looking walls around the place as well that represent an older bay that was here that's been built upon. I think it's really important for me to nail this type of thing, trying to introduce the age of an area. It's pretty vital to getting the vibe right, I think. So one of the last things I want to do here is introduce a few vehicles that are parked maybe illegally on the side of the road here. We see heaps of these when we look in real life, and it just sort of adds to that chaotic look that we've got here. This doesn't really look conventional, and these vehicles parked here sort of help with that. Next, I found this really nice stone arch in my workshop that I had never seen before for some reason, and I use it to open up this end of the ferry stop, so we're going to be able to see people walking in and out now, and this looks really cool, I think. So now with most of this area built, I'm going to go back and add in some small props here and there. Moody Bay in real life has some really unique seafood restaurants along the waterfront, and I'm going to start introducing them one by one here. One thing I want to do with these restaurants is do my best to make one stand out from another, or make them unique in one way or another. So if I got my builder's hat on and I was looking at this objectively, I would say the three biggest targets here are A, they need to be on the waterfront. B, there needs to be a pedestrian path that moves through or close to the front of the restaurants. And C, they need to be really colourful and unique restaurants. Everything else, aside from those main targets, is just going to be props and things like that. The first restaurant that I'm working on here on the left hand side of the screen is pretty just basic. And it's pretty small and intimate as well, but it's not exactly a showstopper. The next one that I'm doing with the blue tents out the front here is a little bit more standoutish. You know, you could probably point and tell a friend that, you know, I'm over here under the blue tents and they'd be able to see where you were, sort of thing. And we get progressively more detailed with the restaurants as we move on from here. But for now, we start with these two, and I want to introduce age to this area as well, obviously. So one thing I want to do out here, just into the water a little wee bit, is add some old wooden wharves that maybe used to be here. And I've also taken some time just to make the shore look a little bit more rocky. Now it's time for more detailing. I'm going to put fences in, I'm going to put random props here and there. I really want to jam as much detail into every little corner of this bay that I can. And that means varying a lot of the detail as well. Some of the areas may be a little bit more industrial with pipes or vents. Some other areas may have contractors that are fixing or repairing buildings. And of course the restaurants are going to be there as well. Being a fishing bay, maybe there's a lot of fish props around. There's fishing rods, fish bins, cargo nets. So I'm really investing a lot of time into thinking about what would be down here realistically, and also trying to vary all these areas as much as I possibly can. This restaurant up here took me well over an hour to detail. Yes, I know I gotta up my game, but because of that, I'm gonna show you guys the rest of these restaurants that I've introduced one by one here in a cinematic. The first one I build here is called Katina, and it is known as the Red Brick Restaurant. The most notable feature is the beautiful handmade tablecloths. And with only 7 tables available, you better be quick with your booking. The next one's called Sunset, and it's based on real life, and this is the largest restaurant in the bay. A great place to go if you don't have a booking. And the last restaurant I've made here I've called Sully's, after Sully and all the awesome work he's done with his Greek pack. And this one here is basically an open front restaurant. You can see the fish, you can see the fishermen bringing it in, you get to pick which one you want to cook, and away you go, a beautiful meal while you watch the sunset. In the next episode, we build the other half of this bay and we introduce some really unique things. I sincerely hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. If you have, you'll hit the thumbs up for me. I really appreciate every time someone does that, and I hope you guys have a great day. Spread the love and peace.